It's funny, isn't it, how often you find yourself thinking, what's going on? How can things be unfolding as they are? And then you remember what happened in America. So the idea of people queuing up to see a Boris Johnson speech, which I mean, we can hope it contains something that is true, accurate or even uplifting for ordinary people. And it's far from impossible that will happen. But the idea of queuing up for it, with the country in the state that it's in, as if he remained some sort of Teflon-coated messiah, it's not remarkable at all. Throughout history, we've had examples of this. Most recently, of course, in America, where people queued up for days to be lied to by a strange orange man-child. So I suppose we should perhaps, I know it's a big ask on a morning like this, but be grateful that we haven't fallen quite as far as America yet. I have a problem this morning, and I need your help. And it's a multiple problem. It's a multifarious problem, based on many things, based upon how uncomfortable most of us are talking about being poor. You know, it's been cast for many, many generations in this country as a source of shame. Even if it is not your fault, people are embarrassed. I remember when we first started talking about food banks, the palpable shame that people felt when ringing in to tell me that they had been compelled to visit one. The line that really breaks my heart. Do you know, it's funny, isn't it? You don't always spot immediately the really heartbreaking stuff. Partly because I've got one eye on the clock and I'm trying to listen and I'm trying to concentrate. And the first time it happens, it washes over you. And then the second time it happens, it resonates a little more. And the 20th time it happens, you think, oh my God, that is an actual example of social gaslighting. So people would say to me, I've never claimed benefits. And I'd be like, I'm 49 years old. I nearly said I'd be like. People would say to me, I've never claimed benefits, while explaining their use of food banks or their reliance upon universal credit or any of those exercisings of the safety net that we all pay as members of society to provide. And I realised that being unemployed had been rendered shameful. I've never claimed benefits, James, and I don't care whether you've claimed benefits or not. This is your right. This is what society means. This is why we have institutions. It's why we have a flipping government, so that when you are on your uppers, you will get help. And the price we pay for a safety net is the knowledge that some people possessed of pretty pathetic existences, and I mean that literally pathetic existences, may choose or may have little choice but to use it as some sort of trampoline. I step over people on the way into work in the mornings. I walk past people sleeping on pavements, in sleeping bags, occasionally in tents. And I know that we're still sixth or fifth. We are one of the biggest economies in the world. And I struggle. And I do what you do. I just look the other way sometimes, because the struggle of understanding how those two situations can be simultaneously sustained, it fries my brain. You know, how can there be people, and I worry sometimes when I notice changes in the demographic of the people sleeping on the streets, the people sleeping in doorways in central London, and they seem to be, I see more younger women than I've ever seen before, and I don't know why, but obviously the vulnerability hits you much harder than it does with a grizzled looking older man. But you look at that and you don't know the story and you don't know the reason, but you do know that it makes very little sense in the context of our overall economic health. And then you realise that economic health is designed or defined by a very small number of people having pots of cash. And that makes a healthy economy. That makes you one of the biggest economies in the world. And so there's no real tension at all. We just walk on by. And then you come to the problem of understanding what being poor really means. So for me, I have no clue, really, you know. I may have stood in the occasional supermarket queue wondering whether my card was going to get rejected or not, but that's only because I'd been out on the lash the previous night or 2 nights previously and spent money that I couldn't really afford until my next payday. Or, you know, when I was a younger man, if I really hit the skids, I'd ring my dad, he'd bail me out. I could borrow. I was never poor. It's pathetic to pretend that you have any knowledge whatsoever of what it might mean to rely upon £20 a week. And that's why I get so unhappy when I hear people like Dominic Raab talking so blithely about how little impact this will have. Pause for a moment to reflect upon a country that remains on paper among the biggest economies in the world, and yet has a Deputy Prime Minister this morning almost offering up as a win the quite possibly untrue claim that nobody in this country will have to choose between heating and eating this winter. Just reflect upon that for a moment. That's a win. I don't think it's true, for what it's worth, but Dominic Raab is a man who thinks that women insulting men can be misogyny. So, the work that's needed to understand what passes for a brain in his noggin is not something I can undertake in 3 hours, especially not when the Prime Minister's due to speak in 90 minutes or so. But to offer that up as a win, under our glorious rule, nobody will have to choose between heating and eating. Brackets, probably not true, close brackets. Why are there people sleeping on the streets if unemployment benefits are too generous? Oh, don't ask questions like that. Just queue up by the gin stand in Manchester and wave your little flag. It's crazy, right? But why does it continue? Partly because of that shaming of the poor shaming, that notion that not only is it your fault, not only does everybody else think it's your fault that you're skint, but you do too. You know? That's part of the self-preservation of prejudice, isn't it? This is one of my favourite psychological theories. I haven't read any academic accounts of it, but for goodness sake, there must be out there. It can't be me that's come up with this. The idea that the reason why we hate so heavily upon vulnerable people is to kid ourselves that it could never happen to us. I think this might be the most important lesson for people to learn in the context of politics, prejudice and common decency. Why do you hate upon someone who is homeless or someone who is unemployed or someone who is struggling? Answer, because if I can convince myself, however unfairly and deceitfully, that it's their fault, then I can convince myself that it will never happen to me. And that extends into so many different corners of existence. Quite often, and I'm not making excuses for people who are performatively unpleasant, or people who get paid to encourage you to think unpleasant thoughts about eco-protesters, or about homeless people, or about the unemployed, or about immigrants, or about single mothers. I'm thinking more about how it is so effective, why it works. And it works because none of us want to acknowledge how many paychecks we are away from oblivion. None of us want to acknowledge what would happen if the wheels came off. I have a theory, I have a thesis. I call it getting over the line. I am very middle class, and in the context of 100% of the population, I'm very comfortably off now. I'm lucky. I'm privileged. I know you're not supposed to use that word. You're supposed to pretend it's all down to hard work and hard graft. I'm very, very lucky. And I've always, in the back of my mind, had a concept of getting over the line, apart from getting sort of terminally ill and not getting health care or something like that, having enough money that if everything went belly up and I couldn't get arrested, we wouldn't starve. It's a psychological condition. My wife, who is obviously in an identical situation to me financially, we're completely committed and combined in every area of our lives, that she doesn't have it. She's got a different attitude. She's got more of a whatever happens, we'll be able to earn a crust kind of attitude. I've got I can conceive of losing everything. I think they used to call it tramp angst. So it's just a different psychological approach, but it hinges upon the fact that we're all vulnerable. Unless you've inherited money or made a ton of money, then there are circumstances you can imagine. How big an economic collapse would it take for you to move into negative equity at the moment? So even if you live in a big house, even if you live in a nice house, look what the cladding scandal has done to people who played by the rules, who got on the property ladder and then end up in a property that's worth a fraction of what they owe to live in it. It's thin. It's veneer. It's paper thin prosperity. Unless, like the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you're married to the daughter of one of the richest people in the world and you are personally estimated to be worth a couple of £100 million. Now, that doesn't mean you can't understand what it's like to be poor. That doesn't mean that you won't understand what it's like to be poor. But I think it means that you have to work a little bit harder to understand what £20 a week means to people who are terrified of losing it. That's all. And because so many of us are so keen to believe that this could never happen to us, we're never going to be 20 quid a week away from proper pain. You know, the Citizens Advice Charity, it used to be the Citizens, the CAB, the Citizens Advice Charity, says that when this cut kicks in today, because it was brought in at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but most people are worse off at the end of the pandemic than they were at the beginning. Certainly in terms of your weekly pocketbook, even if you've managed to squirrel a few quid away, and people on universal credit generally won't have managed to do that. Things are getting more expensive now. You recognise that. The economic picture now is one that Boris Johnson claims he has to fix. So to claim that the universal credit increase that was introduced at the beginning of the pandemic is no longer necessary is another example of the doublethink that this government indulges in. Boris Johnson will today deliver a speech in which he will announce how he is the man to fix the economy and to fix Britain, i.e. acknowledging that it's broken. But the money given to the poorest people in that economy to help them through the storm of the pandemic is being taken away. So either the economy is fixed, in which case the poorest people in the country don't need the 20 odd quid a week help that they were given at the beginning of this to keep them away from genuine poverty, to keep them away from hunger and worse. Or it's not fixed, in which case Boris Johnson is the man to fix it, which is what he's going to claim in Manchester today. It's at every turn at the moment with this government, the doublethink. If it's fixed, he can't deliver a speech saying he's going to fix it. If it's not fixed, he can't really, in all conscience, take 20 quid a week away from the poorest people in society. And Citizens Advice estimates that 1/3 of people on universal credit will end up in debt when this extra payment is removed. And by debt, I mean every single week they will have more money going out than they have coming in. And if you listen to the right people and read the right newspapers, you're already thinking, well, that's because they spend all their money on super strength lager and flat screen televisions. A single person under the age of 25 is expected to survive on £59 a week as of today. That's a fall of £25 from where they were yesterday. £59 a week. A couple where either one of them is 25 or over, they go down today from £137 a week to £117 a week. But it's their fault. And they should buy more vegetables or stop smoking. And why do you end up believing that vile, nasty rhetoric? Well, it's not because you're a vile, nasty person. Quite the opposite. It's because you're vulnerable. And you know somewhere inside that it could be you. But when someone comes along and tells you, don't worry, mate, it could never possibly be you because all the people who are in this particular hole dug it themselves. They're plebs. They're proles. They're scroungers. They're work shy. They're layabouts. They turn up at the food bank on the lam, you know? Oh, everyone in a food bank is just there so they can spend all their money on fags. And people get paid a fortune to peddle this crap. An absolute fortune. While never mentioning, for example, that 40% of people on universal credit are classed as being in employment. Never mentioning, for example, that we are talking today about 5.8 million people in England, Scotland and Wales who Dominic Raab, not, you might argue, the most reliable man you've ever met, Dominic Raab is claiming none of them, not even the ones on £59 a week, are going to have to choose between heating and eating. So, look, I'm lucky. I'm privileged. I'm well off. Some people listening to this programme will be better off than me. Most people won't be, just by dint of statistics and analysis. I can't quite get my head around what £20 a week feels like if it's crucial. I'm not going to lie to you. I can pull on a pair of trousers that I haven't worn for a couple of weeks or a suit that I haven't worn for a couple of months and find a £20 note in the pocket. I wouldn't even have known that it had gone missing. It's a £20. Oh, that's nice. Excellent. I can do that. I can do that regularly. I wonder what the figure is, actually. It'd be an interesting way to work out how wealthy someone really is. How much money could you comfortably not notice that you'd lost? Used to talk about toilet floors, believe it or not. How big a denomination would it have to be for you to get on your hands and knees under the urinals to pick up money that you've dropped? You're going to get on your hands and knees for 20 pence? You're going to get on your hands and knees for 50 pence? A pound? £2 coin? What about a fiver? You give it a rinse in the sink, a tenner? You're going to get on your hands and knees, wipe the wee off it, pop it back in your pocket? Because if you are living in debt and having £20 a week taken off you, you're already on your hands and knees. And this government today is kicking you right where it hurts. But they're queuing up by the gin stand in Manchester to give him a round of applause. And why are you cheering him? Why are you on his side? Why are you? Come on, Boris is going to smash it. Why? Because you are so desperate to believe that you will never, ever, ever be vulnerable, that you've ended up supporting the architects of unfairness and inequality on a scale that is actually heartbreaking. Conservative Party conference, flagship speech from a Prime Minister elected on a tissue of nonsense that is being revealed every day at a scale not even I saw coming, chooses this moment to take £20 a week from the pockets of the poorest people in the land. It's incredible. So you help me, help them understand why £20 is a lot of money. I don't. To me, it's not. So forget about Rishi Sunak. Forget about how rich his wife's dad is. Forget about Boris Johnson. Just you tell me why £20. Prove to me right now, and we'll ring you straight back, because I know if £20 is a lot of money to you, you're already worried about the phone call. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Prove to me right now that £20 a week is a lot of money. What does it mean to you and to yours? Because I'll tell you something for nothing. Nobody will be listening to your voices in Manchester today. Absolutely nobody. So I will. How do you convince somebody that £20 a week, £80 a month is a significant sum of money? Because there will be nobody in that hall in Manchester today who quite gets it. They will, like me, not see £20 as a significant sum, and that's how they can take it away from you so easily. 0345 6060 973. And to paraphrase Tony Benn, remember that however a society or a government treats its most vulnerable members is the biggest lesson you can get about how it would treat you if they could get away with it. Tony Benn, appropriately enough, after Priti Patel's disgraceful speech yesterday, was talking about refugees. Have a look at how politicians will treat refugees. You'll get an idea of how they treat you if they thought they could get away with it. And these are the little lines that I don't understand the failure to land. You're listening to this and you go, shut up, James. It's so obviously true. But the desire to believe that you are not vulnerable can overcome all manner of evidence to the contrary. Because we want it to. Rob's in Rochester. You better speak, Rob, because I've been banging on a bit longer than I intended to this morning. What would you like to say?
Right. Well, as a severely dyslexic carer for his disabled mother, father of two, I live in Medway, so therefore public transport isn't cheap.
Right.
£6 a day. Anyway, so
to get to your mum's and back, you mean?
To not just get to my mum's and back, I have to 34 mile both way school run. So
okay.
I stop at my mum's halfway because I can't afford to go back home because of the petrol.
Okay.
Obviously, the petrol crisis has caused me to have to go starving for 2 days not last week, the week before, in order to make sure that I had the £30 put into the tank, so therefore I had enough fuel to carry on the week. However, the £20 currently helps me pay my road tax because I can't get a budgeting loan because they don't authorise it for such things for road tax in one lump sum.
You're also doing what Sajid Javid is or yesterday called upon people to do, which is not turning to the state in search of support for poorly family members or family members in need of care. This has been slightly overlooked this week. Sajid Javid calling yesterday for people to turn instead to their families. So you're doing exactly what Sajid Javid, a former Chancellor, now the Secretary of State for Health, has asked you to do. And it doesn't sound to me as if you're flourishing in those circumstances.
No, I'm worse than flourishing. I've been in this situation for a long time because I'm severely dyslexic, so therefore the way I normally get jobs is I'm forced into them by the job centre, and generally the job centre pushes you into the discount retailer type jobs, which pay you minimum wage and don't give you very good job prospects. And
still better than nothing, though, isn't it? Or is it? I mean, forgive me if I'm being a bit clumsy, but I have to ask these questions.
I would say the issue with that whole issue is, why are we paying taxpayers' money to me because companies like discount retailers don't pay their staff enough? So we're paying the profits of.
So we're subsidising low wages, although Boris Johnson today will claim that low wages were all a result of immigration. Talk to me, if you can, about what this. You're going to lose this £20 a week, are you, Rob? This is you lose it as of today.
Yeah. So
what's that going to mean in the short term?
In the short term, it means that come my next payday, which would be the 16th, I will then have to find some way of not spending an additional £20, which basically mean that I have to go 2 or 3 days within a week of not eating, because I can't afford to buy the food. I know it sounds but even fruit and veg coming to sort of, when you think, I have to think that my food budget for a week for me and my 2 girls is about 25 quid. That I can afford to pay, and that has to pay for packed lunches because of school dinners, even though in summer for one of my child it's free, the other one it's not. Okay. I have to work out a way, so the only way I can afford that is by doing packed lunches. Packed lunches generally come to about tenner, so then I have to work out our whole food budget on 15 quid.
What did you have for tea last night?
We had a tin of ravioli. Well, the girls did. Yeah. I had basically leftovers and pasta to go with it, which I know that's pasta and pasta, but it's what's cheap and affordable, and it fills them up. And you are going to be £80 a month worse off as of now. Dominic Robb says you don't need to worry about heating versus eating. The heating-wise, I get that paid through the universal credit. Right. So I'm just going to rack up a massive bill. Already have a massive bill, but I'm not going to worry about that because it's in the universal credit. But yeah, I do completely get that, because if you're on a prepayment system, you're absolutely screwed. And what does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? Well, for me, there isn't one unless I can. Somebody magically grants me a money tree, because I would love to have my own little business so I don't have to work for the man anymore and I can actually earn my own money. But that's. And what happens to your mum when you're working? What happens to your mum? Well, she basically can't go to a hospital appointment. She can't have she has one of those weird seat things, which, you do the business in. Yeah. I have to obviously change that, and we can't afford to have her have a carer. So obviously, and then getting her upstairs for the evening is my last job, and then I go home. But yeah, so obviously when I'm working, I have to work around that. So therefore, generally I would do work in between the shifts. I hear you. And I'm grateful to you for being so honest. I'm not going to patronise you. There's nothing I can do. All I can do is offer you an opportunity to let other people understand the reality of what is happening in this country. And again, I'd remind you, there's just shy of 6 million people on universal credit, and Rob is one of them. Before you go, is that your smoke alarm in the background beeping? That's my mum's smoke alarm that needs a new battery. Can you make sure you do that? Can you make sure you fix that? Yes. Seriously. But that is also another quick. I know, as soon as I said it, I thought that. And you know that you can buy batteries in Poundland or on special in Robert Dyer's. Yeah. But if you spend £2 on batteries today, what would you have been spending that on otherwise? Well, that would have been food, or maybe the petrol in the car, or whatever. Basically, I have to literally, when I have a little bit extra money, I buy better food. I know it sounds crazy. So rather than buying the value cheapo packs of crisps, I'll get Walkers, and the girls will love it because they're getting something that's got a little bit more flavour to it. But that's basically £20, £40 extra a week. That's all that really will do. But £40 a week would actually mean that I can pay all my bills and that I'm balanced zero at the end of the week. And so therefore the stress and all of that sort of slowly dissipates, and anxiety and things like that. On your mental health and their mental health, although it's sense that you shield them from a lot of the problems that you deal with on a daily basis. Before you go, Rob, how old are your girls? I've got a 13-year-old and a just past her 11 plus 10-year-old.
Take care, mate. It is 10:31. Robin Rochester there, just giving a little flavour of what life on Universal Credit is really like. And as one of my regular listeners who's been listening to LBC for a lot longer than I've been working here has pointed out with unerring accuracy, someone will ring in a minute, James, and say that they can make a delicious stew for a family of 19 for just 13 pence. Take their address and we'll all go round for tea. You know, the numbers matter. Do they land? 5.8 million people in England, Scotland and Wales claim universal credit. Almost 40% of them are classed as being unemployment. That, of course, doesn't mean, however hard people may pretend not to understand this, that the other 60% are all unemployed. Long-term sick or severely disabled people, full-time carers who simply can't work are all included in that stat. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, calling yesterday for people to do more caring for their own family, to give up work and care for vulnerable family members or ageing family members in order to reduce the burden upon the social care sector. So he is calling for people to become unemployed, while simultaneously the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are telling them that they can't afford to give them 20 quid a week. And how important is that 20 quid a week? Well, Citizens Advice estimates that a third of people on universal credit will be operating a deficit. And just I hate it because it casts Rob in a sort of unkind light or an unhelpful light is a better word to use. But he's feeding his daughters a tin of ravioli with extra pasta and running at a deficit. Citizens Advice estimates that 51 to £55 a month will be the average shortfall for households currently receiving universal credit when this uplift is removed. Why are they removing it? Because the problems caused by the pandemic are over. What is Boris Johnson going to say in Manchester today? I'm the man to fix all the economic problems caused by the pandemic. That's it, isn't it? You see, I don't know what else I can do in this job. They're taking the money away from these people because the pandemic is over. Therefore, the economic impacts that the money was designed to alleviate have gone. But Boris Johnson is going to deliver a speech today asking for your support on his brave mission to fix all the economic impacts caused by the pandemic. Yeah. 10:37. David's in the Wirral. David, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I have a suggestion for you. I don't know whether you'll concur.
Steady on. It's a family programme.
Not like that.
Oh, good.
We're not going back to the pub day.
Carry on.
No, I was just thinking Messrs Sunak, Johnson and Raab, and throw in Philip Green. How about we just sit them in a room, give them some nice drinks and popcorn, make them watch the Ken Loach film, I, Daniel Blake? I think, would it impact upon them, their souls?
No, it wouldn't. And, you know, I can't remember who it was. You could almost pick a name or spin the bottle on this.
Yeah.
I think it might have been Gove, but I may have done him a disservice there, but claiming that it was all nonsense and that it was all exaggerated or that it was all pantomime or embellished or scaremongering. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I don't need to...
Was that the same Gove who was raised by fine socialists, I wonder? I don't know.
I don't know if that's true. They were Fisher folk. But how do you persuade somebody... I can't sit them down in front of a film. Not least because they could point out the film is, although based on reality, it is still a drama.
Well, what about?
How do you persuade this fella over here that £20 a week is a lot of money?
A few good books by a Georgie Orwell into the mix,
or Robert Trussell, but I don't think it does.
Exactly.
No, I think you're making a very strong rhetorical point. Is that nothing's going to persuade a certain type of person that there is such a thing as genuine need.
I know, and you'll hate me for saying this, but
no, I won't.
Within that mix, I'm guessing the people who lack the empathy that you clearly have.
It's not,
voted Brexit, but we shouldn't go off. That would be a distraction.
Well, it may be a distraction because, of course, the economic problems that Boris Johnson is going to fix today were caused entirely by the pandemic that every other country in the world has been through, and has nothing to do. So, I mean, you're playing to my particular gallery here. Is there? Do you receive universal credit yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my situation.
Yeah.
I'm back living in my parents' house. I don't know whether you know.
I don't know your parents' house. I know the Wirral a bit. Yeah, so it's a nice part of town.
Yeah, and ironically, I'm back living here. I lived in, like yourself, I loved London. I lived in London 20 years, and had a nice little flat with the first wife and all that. Now, as I talk to you, just to give you a visualization, on my day off, as I say, I work nights in a care home supporting people with Alzheimer's and dementia and stuff.
Okay.
I'm lying in bed dressed like Captain Scott in his igloo, if you will.
To keep warm.
Do you see what, yeah, to keep the obviously the radiators on and stuff like that. And I, of course, I do receive that universal credit. I've never been on wages like this in my life. You know, I was trained in social work in London, working in forensic mental health, but we won't go into that.
Okay.
But now, I mean, I've always been like yourself. I've always had a conscience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I don't want to do the. We've got a problem with this because it sounds like we're casting ourselves as being morally superior to some of the people that we're talking about.
Far from my intention, James.
No, I know it isn't, but I'm thinking about them and reaching them, it's more perhaps in a way because you can make it a selfish impulse. You can make the world fairer because you're worried that you might end up on the wrong side of the unfairness. So we could say the reason why we need more generous universal credit is in case you need it one day.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a brief scenario. I mean, I literally get the train to work. It's only one stop. It's 4 minutes.
Right.
But because of the pitiful wages in the caring sector, as you're well aware, James.
Yes.
I'm a 59-year-old man jumping the train.
You're fair dodging.
I would have done that when I was about 16, I reckon. I didn't think I'd be doing it now. I'm literally jumping the train.
How much do you earn?
Saving me a few quid.
Well, what do you take home before universal credit?
Yeah, okay. Let's say, on average, if I don't do overtime, it would be about 1,280 or something.
A month?
Yeah.
And when they take this £20 a week off you, what difference is that going to make to your life?
Well, quite significant, I would conjecture, because obviously I'm using that to pay my bills and stuff like that, and it's helping. I mean, I must declare that luckily I have an altruistic brother who lives in Canterbury who throws me a few quid now and again.
Yes.
So maybe my situation's not as sadly deplorable as other individuals. And just going back to that previous caller, I moved. The reason I moved back here from London, Jane, was to support my mum, my elderly mum, with my dad. Now, he lived till he was 90. He had physical problems. I won't go into that. He died. He was 90. That's a good age. And then my mum developed Alzheimer's. And then I realised how this system is so atrocious. If mum hadn't been on their attendance allowance, and I used to take her out every day, cinemas and all this, the wages they paid me as a carer were unbelievable. Well, you know them.
Well, I do now. I don't. Yes, I know. I do now.
You know,
you're working. You're in receipt of universal credit. You're still doing a bit of caring for your mum on the side. You're doing.
I was, yeah.
You were. I beg your pardon.
It's quite. Sorry, yeah. As I say, I'm working now supporting people in a huge care home, which is probably owned by some German bank, no doubt, down the line.
At least you've still got your sense of humour, and I do mean that. I mean, it is impossible.
You know what Scousers, Jones?
I am, but I'm mildly familiar with the breed, David, and I wish you the very best. You know that I do. And speaking of Scousers, Sheila Fogarty, of course, will be with you at 1 o'clock. It's coming up to 10:45, and it is simply a case of acknowledging the lived experience of other people. It's not a patting on the back session for people possessed of empathy, or indeed a circular firing squad for people who aren't. I think everybody is, but it depends where it comes from. And if one way of getting it to increase is finding a way of getting it to come from within, worrying about yourself rather than without, I think mine does. That's why I explained at the beginning about tramp angst, about thinking about the wheels coming off. What would happen to me if the wheels came off? I guess there are two ways of doing it. You put epic amounts of energy into persuading yourself that the wheels will never come off. I wonder if that's happened to you. I wonder if you find yourself listening to this programme today and thinking, good grief, 10 years ago, I'd have been one of the people sending in the vile messages. 10 years ago, I might not have been sending in the vile messages because that's quite weird, but I'd have been thinking some of the stuff that Rupert Murdoch's papers have been telling me to think about the unemployed for years. I'd have been thinking. And if you want to know how close we are to the other edge, LBC's footage yesterday of people taking it upon themselves to quite violently remove environmental protesters from the road, regardless of how you think about that protest. the people who are essentially committing crimes, committing physical assaults upon their fellow citizens because they disagree with the protest, they're encouraged to do that by most of the media. And if it's the environmental protesters today who you don't agree with, but who fellow citizens are being essentially incited to batter, who will it be tomorrow? That's the problem, isn't it, with divided societies, is that we all think we're on the right side of the divide until we're not. Play a couple of clips, I think, now. Dominic Raab is taking quite a lot of jip for claiming... Well, I'll play you the clip in a minute. I need you to know... Well, let's hear the clip first. See if you can spot the mistake with what the Deputy Prime Minister had to say on a subject other than his dishonest insistence that nobody in the country will be struggling or choosing between heating and eating as a consequence of the universal credit cut that comes in today. This is Dominic Raab.
I think insults and misogyny is, of course, absolutely wrong, whether it's a man against a woman or a woman against a man.
Right. So I'm just trying to think how he ended up thinking misogyny could involve a woman against a man. I mean, the dictionary definition of misogyny is a deeply ingrained hatred of women. But also, Dominic Raab went to Oxford, right? So he knows... OK, let me make it simple for you. Have you ever heard of the word gynaecologist? Yeah? Gynaecologist. What are the first three letters of gynaecologist? G-Y-N, right? I could have a crack at doing the Greek letters, but I always get confused with the Y. Is it gamma E ni? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, it comes from the Greek word for woman, in the same way that gynecology, the study of woman, comes from the Greek word for woman, and the logy bit comes from the Greek word for knowledge, logos. So, gynecology, study of women. Misogynistic, if you want to make it really crystal clear for Diminic, also has the root woman in its very, very core. So a deep-rooted hatred of women, as denoted by the fact... I mean, you'd think Boris Johnson, as one of the country's finest classicists, would dismiss Dominic Raab immediately for having such a poor grasp of the most simple etymology. Maybe he thought that the crucial syllables in the word misogynistic were miso. He possibly thought it was about Japanese soup. I don't know. I'm trying to give the man a break, because how you could think that a deep-rooted hatred of women could involve women insulting men is a question for bigger brains than mine. Meanwhile, as Dominic Raab was speaking, Theresa Coffey, who I would remind you is the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, was at a party in Manchester. Now, I'm not exaggerating or inventing. I try not to do either of those, but occasionally I'm sure I fall into the first trap, if not the second. And as the people like Rob and our other callers who've woken up this morning to deal with the knowledge that they are now £85, £86 a month worse off, despite already being the poorest people in the country. I'll say that again. This is a government that is taking the 5.8 million poorest people in this country, in England, Scotland and Wales, and consciously and deliberately making them much, much poorer. They're doing that right now. They woke up this morning to that knowledge. While they were sleeping, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, the woman who heads up the department in charge of these policies and who demonstrated her own abject ignorance of the most basic fundamentals when she claimed that in order to make up the shortfall, they'd only have to do 2 hours work extra per week. Theresa Coffey was doing this.
Because I swear it's the truth.
Never been so grateful for a fade out in my life, I'll tell you. But that was last night on stage at a karaoke party in Manchester in front of a cheering crowd. Secretary of State for Work and Pensions singing "I've had the time of my life," while 5.8 million people woke up this morning to deal with the knowledge that she has just made the poorest people in the whole country, the 5.8 million poorest people in the country, measurably and considerably poorer. 10:53 is the time. And don't forget that in the same breath, the government is currently insisting that businesses should have been better prepared for all the problems that the government insisted would never happen. Double think. Dave's in Manchester. Dave, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I was just talking with you.
You weren't at that karaoke, were you, Dave?
I wasn't. No.
Oh, glad to
you know
hear.
what, I'm staying out of the centre of Manchester because, given what's going on at the moment with these cuts to people, that it just makes my blood boil. And I thought, I couldn't trust myself to be civil to anybody I saw walking past with a blue rosette or whatever. So
Sure.
I stay well out of the city centre. Well, what I was calling you for was your researcher asked me, how's the £20 cut in universal credit affected you? And it's actually the straight answer is not a jot.
Yes.
Because I'm a job, a contract, an agency social worker. It affects me not a lot, but the people I work with, the clients that I work for, it affects them tremendously. And I was just thinking of all the people, I primarily work with troubled youth.
Right.
And, I go into houses and, and that 20 quid cut is just devastating, and I was just wondering how many cases I could talk to you about where I could tell you where I've walked into a house and it's freezing. It's absolutely freezing. And I say, what's the problem? Why is it so cold in here? And everybody, like one of your previous callers said, was sat there with a couple of jumpers and scarves on. And said, why is it so cold in here? And it's, the boiler doesn't work. And so let me have a look at the boiler. And I'm no
I see.
engineer.
Sure.
And so I'll go and have a look at the boiler and say, I can't see anything wrong with it,
mate.
And you can see a pilot plane there. I think, well, it's a pilot plane.
Yeah.
And, well, it seems to be working all right. And are you sure? And, and then I go away afterwards and I said, well, look, have you reported it? Who's your landlord? Report it to the landlord. Oh, we will do. And then I go away afterwards and then, another colleague will go and said, you know what, that boiler doesn't work. And he said, there's no credit on it. Nothing wrong with that boiler. They just haven't got any money to put any credit on the boiler. That's right, they're all sat there.
And I think the per unit price, if you're doing it on a prepay on a key, is actually higher than it is if you can afford not to have a prepay key. It certainly was a few years ago when we talked about these issues a lot more.
Yeah, but again, there are other cases that I go, and it's not just the heat. That Dominic Raab said.
Well, this is just to clarify for anyone under any illusions. This is already happening while they're in receipt of this uplift, and they're already not heating their homes. But that's probably because they're eating. That's probably because they're eating pheasant every night, is it, Dave?
Yes. Well, that's again one of my other little tricks. Is that when I go into a house, I always make a comment about the cupboards and say, "Who put them cupboards up?" And the housing association, and I say, "They don't seem quite straight to me," and I will just flick open the doors just to see what's in the cupboard. And like your previous caller, couple of tins of ravioli, if that. And, so then, have you got much food in the house? And, well, we haven't been shopping lately. And, why haven't, when are you next going shopping?
You're describing shame as well as poverty, aren't you? You're describing a denialism that in many ways prevents the problems being properly reported and therefore properly addressed, perhaps.
Well, this is the other thing. It's the shame of it. People, they don't want to tell me that they haven't got any money for the boilers to top up the credit on the boiler. They don't want to tell me that they haven't got. They've only got a couple of tins of ravioli in the cupboard because they're ashamed that they're not feeding their children properly. Another one, I'll say, well, I've been talking to our education welfare officer, and he says your children's attendance at school is 40%. Why aren't you sending your children to school? And that knocks on to then education attendance, sort of threatening, mum and parents with a fine for not sending their children to school. And so why aren't you sending the children to school? Why are they not going? We haven't got any shoes. And so again, the shame aspect there, what are you going to spend your money? Do you stay in the house, keep warm? You've got no shoes or you've got holes in your shoes. Do you want to go to school? Do you want your kids to go to school and they've got holes in the shoes and the other kids mock them? Look, you've got holes in your shoes.
Of course you are. Kids can be so cruel in that. What you're much closer to this than I'll ever be. And the question, I hope it's not an inappropriate question because it's a personal area of obsession for me. Why are so many people so susceptible to the lies that the people you're describing either don't exist, or the reason why there's holes in the kids' shoes is because dad spent all his money on smack, or they are sticking it all up their nose, or it's on a flat screen television. Why are people so susceptible to the lies when the evidence you deal with every single day is so clear and compelling? Can you make sense of that?
I can't make sense of it, but, again, you talked about, blaming immigrants, the asylum seekers.
Yeah.
Quite often you find these people who are in this poor predicament.
Yeah.
That when you took one of my previous jobs I was social worker for asylum seekers.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best jobs I ever had because I dealt with Kosovans, Sri Lankans, Albanians. They were lovely people. It's a great job. You meet people from all over the world.
And you make a measurable difference. You can see the fruits of your labour.
Yeah, and, they think this country is, Britain, England is wonderful, it's wonderful, And, that's not what the British in general think of you.
It's a funny
and
one,
usually
isn't
you
it?
find these people in the poorest circumstances, they swallow the hype.
Oh, mate, the less you've got, the more susceptible you are to racist liars telling you that there's someone over there who's about to nick it off you.
Yeah,
It's that simple. I mean, it is, it's Rupert Murdoch putting 9 biscuits in his pocket and then paying the Sun editor to tell the person sitting over there the immigrant's going to nick his biscuit.
Yeah, and you say that, maybe they wouldn't have cut the unit. You get people at the lower level of society saying maybe they wouldn't have cut universal credit if they'd stopped wasting all these money on asylum seekers.
Of course, just don't ever, whatever you do, look at the numbers. Just feel the fury, feel the rage, and stoke up the racism. And it is, of course, not confined to any class, but it is at its most self-damaging when it is rampant among the poorest people, because... Yeah. Oh, boy.
I have a neighbour who...
You've made me late for the news. You'll have to do this bit in 10 seconds. Go on.
I have a neighbour who goes to Blackpool all the time, and there's a hotel in Blackpool that's accommodating asylum seekers.
Yeah,
and
I've been reading
complaining
about
because he can't go to Blackpool anymore.
When did he last go to Blackpool?
I don't know.
11:01, and you have to highlight these issues also, and I know this upsets some people. You have to find a way of reaching these people, not just denigrating and dismissing them, even as they wake up every single morning and punch themselves in the face. We're trying, I hope with some success, just to illustrate how much money £20 can be, and it is something from which many people, I hope most people listening to this programme will probably struggle to do. And by hope, obviously, I mean that you are lucky enough not to really miss £20 a week. I just think about it in those terms, okay? I talked earlier about pulling a suit on, because it happened the other day. I went to a wedding, hadn't worn my suit for a while, and there were 2 £20 notes in one of the pockets, and it was not a £40 deficit that I'd noticed, okay? Call me a champagne socialist if you please, but it's not quite up there with some of the stuff that's been emerging in the so-called Pandora Papers, but I obviously misplaced 40 quid and didn't notice. I may have had a small sherry at the wedding, that may have played a part in the process, but what would happen to you? So you've got £20, okay? Corpsey suggests I've fallen into a trap by focusing on the 20 rather than the 80 a month, because most of our calculations will be monthly, and it's the £80 a month or the £86 a month that sounds like more. I think for once I'm going to disagree, actually. I think this works better. You've got a £20 note, okay? And now you haven't. How big a deal is that to you? The reason I mention my suit is to illustrate that it's not a very big deal to me. There is a £20 note in my pocket. Suddenly it's not there. I hardly even noticed. I didn't even notice. Now, callers we've spoken to today who are fare dodging in their 50s to avoid the one stop from home to the care home where he works, or the dad who goes without food and for tea last night fed his daughters a tin of ravioli with extra pasta to bulk it up. What do you think £20 means to them? £20 in their pocket, now it's gone. That's what they've done. That's what they've done. And that's what came in overnight while the Secretary of State, and I'm going to run a risk here because Steve Buckley has said that if I play this particular clip again, he's going to report me to Ofcom. Well, bring it on, Steve Buckley. I'm ready for anything you can throw at me, because it is significant that the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions was doing this while those £20 notes were disappearing from the pockets and the purses of the poorest people in the country. Not just today, but a week today, and a week after that, and a week after that, and a week after that, and a week after that. Just think about it, because it's not hard to imagine. It may not even be hard to remember a point in your life where the hell's that £20 note gone? Where is it? I can't get to work. I haven't got the... some of us middle-class people have had moments of cash flow issues as younger people. Or mate, can you just lend me the bus fare to get to work? Because I've got no money until payday. But that's a temporary aberration in our existence. Imagine it being a permanent state of affairs. Well, what would a disappearing £20 note mean to you? I can't find it. I can't find that £20. It's gone. Because this woman presides over a government department responsible today for taking that £20 note out of 5.8 million pockets every single week moving forward, which is fine if you believe that the economic damage suffered during the pandemic is now over. But if you believe that the economic damage suffered during the pandemic is now over, perhaps you could take a moment out of your morning to explain to me why the hell the Prime Minister is about to deliver a speech casting himself as the man poised to fix all the economic damage that's been caused by the pandemic. Either it's over, in which case you better find yourself a new speech, Boris Johnson, or it's not over, in which case the money given to the poorest people in the country, many of whom are in work, many of whom cannot work, many of whom are too busy looking after elderly relatives or young children to go to work, can somehow easily absorb an £80-odd a month reduction in their already relatively pathetic income. Anyway, in case you're just joining us, this was Therese Coffey, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, on stage in Manchester last night, addressing the plight of the people she is paid to represent.
Yes, I swear it's the truth.
That's quite enough of that. I mean, karaoke's an odd thing. It's an odd flex at the best of times, isn't it? But that song, on that stage, at this point, with that job, I honestly can't begin to make sense of it. Perhaps you can. Let's go back to Rachel in Bexley Heath and the question of how much money £20 really is, Rachel. What can you tell us?
Hi.
Hello.
First-time caller. I always listen to LBC.
You're very welcome.
I'm on universal credit myself. I have 3 children. I'm a single mum of 3 children. And I'm lucky to be working full-time. But at the start of this pandemic, when this £20 increase came in, I wasn't on universal credit. I was on tax credits, and that had to stop because my son went into school.
Right.
But I wasn't able to be furloughed. I had to work through the pandemic. I couldn't see my children for 3 months because I had to fork out extra money for a childminder because the schools were closed. I've been in that position. £20 is a lot of money. You have to decide, are you going to top up your electricity or gas, or are you going to buy winter clothes for your children, or are you going to do shopping with that? It's really tough for people. So I quite understand, this is not the right time to stop it. I heard a previous caller say, it will be easier to just ease it down rather than just cutting it off just straight like that. It's really unfair.
What happens if you don't? I know these questions are stupid when they reach your ears.
Oh, they're not.
Well, they might be. Well, I haven't asked it yet. It might be really stupid.
Right.
What happens if you don't top up the electricity and the gas? I mean, is that even an option?
You don't have heating. Yeah. So you have to decide, do you keep the house warm or your children become sick, or do you buy food? I've been in temporary accommodation before where there was mold. Nothing was done about it. My son caught pneumonia. He was in hospital for a week. The second day he was there, they had to put him on oxygen. And that was a decision I had to make. Can I feed him, or can I keep the house warm? So there's so many other people out there that's just slipped through the system. and there's just not enough support.
They haven't
There's just not
slipped. They
enough
haven't
support.
slipped through the system, have they? Though that is what the system is designed to do.
Not enough care has been taken. Then that's what it is. It's just
that is
not
the
enough
system.
Care, not
That
enough
is. I mean, it's
attention.
interesting those words that you use, because that is where I would. They must have slipped through the system. They haven't slipped through the system. There's 5.8 million people potentially in the position you describe, and it's a deliberate policy. And today they are £20 a week poorer than they were yesterday.
I mean, not a lot of people know how to fight the system. Not a lot of people are computer savvy.
Where are you going to get the energy?
Savvy.
Where are you going to get the energy?
Exactly. So going through this, going through the process alone is stressful enough. Not to talk of they've taken £20 out of your pocket. What are you going to do? People are going to start running helter-skelter here and there. I'm lucky because I've been in the system. I've moved 13 times in different temporary accommodations. So, I've fought tooth and nail to get to where I am today.
Do you mean somewhere decent to live?
Somewhere decent to live. Actually, and it's a thing of pride as well. You need to level up with society, where society is going now. If you don't have something, an ordinary person would have, you're not that high in society. It's basically poverty for some people. I'm lucky. I work with a charity company that pays well, and I work in partnership with Oxley's as well, which is really good. So I'm able to give back whatever I can, to support these people and make sure they're on the right benefits, they're getting enough money to live on. But it's really hard because going through the process alone just takes a lot away from you.
You don't receive universal credit yourself then?
I do receive universal credit, but after my pay, I don't receive anything at all. So it covers part of my housing costs.
No, you see that this is the thing. This is why I have to stress. And you're very kind to say that my questions aren't stupid, but they are actually, because you see yourself as having. You see yourself as lucky, and you see yourself as having successfully negotiated what we will call the system. And at the end of that process, when you have successfully negotiated the system and you are lucky and you are in full-time work, you still need help.
Of course, definitely. I mean, these questions will only be
you
silly
lose
to
today.
someone that hasn't been in that position.
Do you lose today?
I mean,
does money come out of your packet
money
today?
comes as soon as money comes in. Money's gone.
But there's
out.
£20. Did you get the uplift last year?
I got the uplift.
So you're worse off
year.
now than you were.
Yes,
right.
definitely, definitely. But it's only silly. The question would only be silly to someone who hasn't been in that position, who hasn't been through that experience.
Yeah.
I mean, these are really simple, basic needs for people to live on. Not everybody on benefits can work. Some people can, but it's just still not enough. And I feel like it needs to be looked into because the Prime Minister, everyone thinks, all right, that £20 was a support. That £20 made someone's day. That £20 made someone's week, made someone's month. Do you understand what I mean?
Made someone's dinner.
Exactly. And taking that away just like that. I mean, even though there were warnings, there were messages, emails going out that it's coming to an end, people are frightened. How do I call up and say, all right, what do I do next? Where do I find this £20 from? The support is not out there. It's not enough.
And it's reducing, and it's diminishing, and it's disappearing, and it's deliberate. Rachel, that's one of the most memorable calls I've ever taken on this subject for a whole heap of reasons, not least because you expressed yourself so perfectly and so clearly. And I am going to apologise for asking stupid questions, even if you're kind enough to suggest that they're not stupid, because I still struggle to believe what is normal for many other people. And Rachel, by her own definition, quite understandably, because she's comparing where she is now to where she is before, is one of the lucky ones. I'm not sure she's going to be singing that she's had the time of her life on a stage in Manchester anytime soon. But according to the way the system works, she is. And that speech from the Prime Minister, where he will explain why he's the man to fix the economy, while simultaneously introducing a policy that recognises the economy has now been fixed, therefore the uplift given to the poorest people in the country is no longer necessary. I don't think I'm going to play the clip of Therese Coffey singing last night again, for a whole heap of reasons, not least my own personal equilibrium. But that is one of the grossest examples of political tone deafness, and indeed literal tone deafness, that I have ever encountered in my life. It really is. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, give it 10 minutes. There'll be another one along any minute, James, with this lot. And you're absolutely right. But there's something about that. Also, I think I suffer from a bit of, I don't know, is it misogyny? Not in the way that Dominic Raab understands the word to be, but I think in the same way that you're shocked by female criminals committing crimes that are slightly less shocking when it's male criminals, I do have I'm sure it's wrong, and I shall work on it, but you expect women to be a bit more caring than men are. I think men are conditioned from a very, very early age to sort of see everything as a challenge that can be fixed, and to see vulnerability and nurturing as something for the birds. I didn't mean that as a synonym for females. I'm not lapsing into 1960s language. I meant that as the figure of the speech for something for the birds, meaning something trivial, something ridiculous. But I'm always slightly more shocked. Priti Patel talking about refugees, Therese Coffey singing and dancing while the poorest people in the country are terrified about what the next few months might hold. I am slightly more shocked when it's women than when it's men, but I'm sure that is mildly misogynistic of me. Well, not misogynistic. There's no hatred involved. Quite the opposite, actually. It's an unrealistically high expectation that I wouldn't hold for a man. I'm more shocked when Therese Coffey or Priti Patel dance this particularly vile fandango than I am when, for example, Dominic Raab or Jacob Rees-Mogg do. Might be a topic in that, actually, whether we sort of try and unravel it. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Peter is in Wimbledon. Peter, what can you tell us? How can you make someone appreciate how much £20 is?
To be honest with you, James, quite bloody easy. I mean, me, myself, I'm on, obviously, universal credit, hence the reason for the call.
Yes.
But I also get other benefits as well. I get ESA and PIP. Now, okay, to some people you think, well, okay, we're at £20 a week, and you get them benefits, so obviously you don't work. Well, actually, you know what? I do work. I used to be a nurse. I now work for a private medical training company teaching cannulation phlebotomy. But I'm on a 0 hours contract. Now, the problem is, because of the pandemic and everything, obviously, these skills still need to be out there. But like I say, I'm on ESA and PIP. Now, for anyone that don't quite get the understanding of that, that's a disability benefit. Now, I've got multiple health conditions, some of which have derived from, previous work I used to do in the NHS with a chemical that's now banned in the UK. It's caused me part of the reasons I've got COPD. But nonetheless, I still go up and down the country when the work is available, because the problem is I work for a third-party company. If training in the NHS, the private sector, anyone that wants to do the work.
Yes.
If people ain't booking onto the courses, that means I don't get no work. If I don't get no work, then my boss ain't going to give me any money, which is rightly so. It's the old saying, you don't get money for nothing. It'd be nice if we did, but nonetheless.
So I've just dumped that. I've just dumped that. Your description of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions isn't acceptable at this time of day on the radio station. So just be aware of that and continue with your point.
Right. Right. I'm sorry to you, the rest of the team, and
that's right. No one heard it except me. That's what dumping means. So, but don't do it again, otherwise we'll have a problem.
Yeah. No, I won't. But to be singing I've had the time of my life. And like you say, and you other callers, the other fellow I was listening to earlier saying about, I think he said it was a single dad, and, his two girls had tin ravioli and he just had remnants. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, pretend she's here. Don't use that word again, but pretend that Therese Coffey is here and she needs proper help understanding that £20 is a lot of money. There's that infamous photograph of her with a big fat cigar, which presumably cost more than £20. But just how could you prove it to her that it's a serious sum of money for millions of people in the country that she ostensibly governs?
I'll tell you how it is.
Yeah.
Right. I went to Tesco's this morning. Where my son goes to school, he can go by himself. But I thought, I walk halfway.
Yeah.
The Tesco's is halfway, and he walks the rest. He met up with some of his friends. I popped in, got some bits and pieces. But literally, the things I was buying was the cheapest of the cheapest. And as I'm going round, I'm actually counting up in my head that, right, well, actually, yeah, okay, hang on a minute, that one's £1.70, but that one's better than that one because that's like a packet of ham. So, okay, that ham you get, I don't know, I can't remember how many bloody slices, but, it's like that more like Wiltshire curled ham or whatever, the description is. And it's like £2-3 a packet, or I can get this cheap square, sort of like, 4x4 inch square packet of ham, 30 in a pack, wafer thin. Whereas more pumped up with water than it is actually ham, and it's probably, the pig's
It's a false economy in a way, isn't it? But it is bulk. It's bulk. You're talking about bulk.
And and the saying about, to have like healthy and eat more healthily, this, that, the other. Now, along with my COPD, I've got a range of other health conditions that I ain't going to bore you or the rest of the listeners with. But my intake of food is a lot less than my wife and a lot less than my son.
Right.
So for me, I mean, one of the other conditions I've got is type 1 diabetes. So for me, eating is important. I've got an insulin pump. I don't know if you full-handed about the beeps coming off in the background while I was waiting to speak to you.
Sure.
But at the same time, I can't process food very easily due to other conditions.
So the better the food, the better your condition. The impacts are on every aspect of your existence, really, of having to buy poorer
so
quality
for me to
grub.
eat sort of like more appropriate food, it's going to cost me a lot more money.
Which you now don't have. Which you now don't have. I mean, that's it. You've done it. That's it. If she's here, if she can hear, that would do it. I will make myself. I am already disabled. I'm already in receipt of PIP. I'm already poorly, and taking this money away from me will change my diet in a way that will make me even more poorly and make my health even worse. Peter, I'm sorry I have to move on.
Kan